Thank you, thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate. Just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
And then I turn around and look at the Uber, and the Uber driver is speeding away. I get out of the revolving door, and I threw my bags down, turned around, ran towards the Uber driver, screaming, which, if I'm being honest with you guys, caused a bit of a stir at the airport. Yeah, you can't do that. You can't just throw your bags down and run the other way. Because that's terrorism, so you can't. That's what they've taught us. And as I'm chasing this Uber down, my hand grazes my back pocket where my phone is comfortably resting, you guys. I was just so stoned I forgot I had pockets. That's what happened there. Which was the worst, because then I had to go back and pick up my bags in a full flop sweat. Everybody else is like still on edge, and I'm like, sorry about that, I'm on drugs. Delta?
Good morning. It's Thursday, Bad News Thursday, September the 19th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer, the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and bad news. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
2, 3. What do we do with a drunken sailor? What do we do with a drunken sailor? What do we do with a drunken sailor? Early in the morning, way up she rises, way up she rises, way up she rises. Early in the morning, way up she rises, way up she rises, way up she rises. Early in the morning.
Shave his belly with a rusty razor.
Thank you. And now, Barney and Company.
Barney Company picks it up. Stu, take it away.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Good morning, Maria, and good morning, everyone. It is the day after the big rate cut. When the cut was announced, stocks were all over the place, but things have settled down. Investors like that half-point cut. It's a rally across the board. Will you look at this? The Dow Industrials are probably 400 points plus. That's about just over 1%. But look at the NASDAQ, a 415-point gain. Okay, this is pre-market. That's over 2%. That is a very solid rally. Take a look at big tech. Straight up, I predict, I've not seen it yet, but I predict straight up for all of them. I'm right. Microsoft, Apple, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, all of them up 1 or 2 percentage points. Bitcoin, that's now at $62,000 per coin. Interest rates, though, they're holding pretty steady. The 10-year Treasury yields 3.76 right now, and the 2-year coming in, that's up, that yield, and the 2-year coming in at 3.65. That yield is also a little higher. Not much of a move on the price of oil. It is up $1 at $72. Gas, though, that is now starting to go up in price. $3.22 for regular, that's up 1 cent overnight. No change for diesel, $3.59. Politics, 2 big appearances for Donald Trump. A huge and lively crowd at the Nassau Causoleum just outside New York City. He thinks he could be the first Republican presidential candidate to win New York in 4 decades. He also appeared with Greg Gutfeld. He was funny, engaging, and very likable. The audience did not know he was the guest until he walked on the set, and they gave him a rousing reception. We have new polls which show the race to be a virtual dead heat. The Fox poll shows Harris leads 50-48 nationally. Trump leads Harris 50-48 in battleground states. Harris takes a hit from the Teamsters Union. They will not endorse her or Trump. They're normally solidly behind the Democrat, but this year, 59% of the rank and file support Trump. On the show today, with the race a dead heat, which candidate can break out? In my opinion, Trump has the best chance because he's out there, knows the issues, and shows boundless energy. Kamala Harris is not out there, does not answer questions, and has not done a press conference since she became the Democrats' candidate. We're going to ask why the left objects to Israel killing Hezbollah's leaders with exploding devices. AOC says it's a violation of humanitarian law. Bernie Sanders wants to stop arms sales to Israel. Why don't they ever rant about hostage-taking or the rape and torture of Israeli civilians? Well, throughout the show, we'll be updating what appears to be a big market rally. If you're an investor, you're in the money. It's Thursday, September 19th, 2024.
And that was Barney and Company. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, cars.
I sold this 70.5 split bumper Camaro to an adult film star. Well, I offered to sell the car on consignment for her because she didn't really like the Camaro and she bought the Corvette. Had a guy call me up the following Sunday, say, hey, I'm interested in your little silver Camaro. He said, I heard an interesting story about that car. He said something about a video online. And I said, yes, this is it. He's concerned with rust. I said, this car's rust-free. I said, it was bought new in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Just a great car. Local builder built it. Yada, yada, yada. Porn star owned it for a few days. It's a great car. Put it up on the lift and looked at it and Bob said, man, this car is nice. And I said, that's all I sell is nice cars, sir. Just talking and going back and forth. And he goes, how much are you asking for this car? And I told him. And I told him who I was selling it for. I said, I don't technically own this car. I'm selling it on consignment. He goes, I think I'll take it. My porn star client was extremely happy with her profit. She told me what it took to make the last $3,000 she made. This was a lot easier.
And that was cars. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the patriotic short of the day.
On August 26, 1967, George Day, who was then a major, was shot down over North Vietnam. While ejecting, he badly injured his knee and broke one arm in 3 places. Immediately captured, he endured torture at a prison camp. But after 5 days, he bravely escaped into the jungle, surviving on berries and uncooked frogs while evading enemy forces on his trek to South Vietnam. Despite further injuries from a rocket blast, he reached the Ben Hai River, crossed it on a bamboo log, and entered the demilitarized zone under U.S. artillery fire. Due to his injuries and fatigue, he lost sense of direction and couldn't find U.S. forces in the area. Over several days, he failed to signal friendly aircraft on numerous occasions. After walking into an ambush and being shot, he was recaptured and returned to the same prison which he had escaped, before being sent to numerous prisons in the Hanoi area. There, he misled his captors and maintained fierce resistance for over 5 years.
And that was the patriotic short of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you, and now a little bit of motivation.
To do. On the other side is greatness.
The savage mindset, but things are going bad, guess what they do? Quitting's out of the question. All they think about is how am I going to get through this? There's no quitting, it's just getting through and thriving, not surviving.
You gotta get comfortable being uncomfortable. Every day you have to do this shit. Because why? When you stop doing it, you don't just maintain it. If you stop shooting a gun, you're not going to be a great shot when you pick a gun up a year from now. The only way to keep from getting rusty is to constantly over that motherfucking machine. The machine exists. You got to keep challenging every day. No one wants to grind. They just want the end result. You can't get the end result without the grind. But you got to crave that end result so intensely that the work becomes irrelevant. But if you really want to set some goals and you're willing to do what it takes and sacrifice to put yourself around that and not worry about what everybody else is going to say, not worry about hurting feelings, you're guaranteed success in whatever you do.
Most of the time, we don't have someone there to keep us in line, to make us do push-ups and give us a good, swift kick in the ass when we slack off. What we have to do is we have to be our own sergeant, to hold the highest standards and allow no slack.
Your problem is you start something, you stop it. You start something, you stop it. You feel good, you do it. You don't feel good, you quit. People who do stuff consistently and on time, they surpass people who talented and gifted. Stop waiting for something to move you and move yourself. You're your biggest problem. Everything is external that moves you. Now I want you to start moving yourself internally. I want you to be able to push your buttons and not let anything else push your buttons. You gotta move you every single day. If you get to a point in your day and you down and out, if you get to a point in your day and you exhausted, you get to a point in your day and you're not feeling it, you can stop right there and change the mood. Nobody control your mood. You control your mood. You control your feelings.
I don't care how small it is. I don't care how minuscule the movement is, but make movement. Move forward and do that every single day, no matter what, including today. You aren't getting any closer to your 5-year plan or your 3-year plan or your 7-year plan or any plan that you've got unless you get up and start getting after it today.
I woke up one day and stopped making excuses. I woke up one day and stopped playing the blame game. I woke up one day and looked at the man in the mirror and was like, yo, bro, what are you doing? Wake up. It's showtime. Let's go. Get up. Go to class. Get up. Do your homework. Work on your gift. It was given to you, but you got to hone it.
When you want to become a diamond, your whole attitude change, your whole mindset, your thinking, your relationship, the decisions that you make, how you spend your time, your energy, all of it changes. See, this is something that you can't be in this business. This business has to be in you.
You take advantage of this opportunity. You let everything else go. You eat different. You study different. You practice different.
It's one thing to talk about your destiny. It's one thing to dream about your destiny. But it's another thing to wake up when you know you're supposed to wake up, to say no to that party, saying no to quitting when you still got 100 more shots to make, saying no when your body's saying stop, but you put in 50 more push-ups. You can't just talk about it. You gotta be about it.
Yep, it's tough. It's hard. I'm not telling you it's gonna be easy to grind, but I can tell you this. It will be worth the sacrifice if you can grind your way through it.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a little bit of meditation. And that was a little meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Daily Stoic.
Find the right scene.
Above all, keep a close watch on this, that you are never so tied to your former acquaintances and friends that you are pulled down to their level. If you don't, you'll be ruined. You must choose whether to be loved by these friends and remain the same person, or to become a better person at the cost of those friends. If you try to have it both ways, you will neither make progress nor keep what you once had. Epictetus, Discourses, 4.2.1, 4-5. From good people you'll learn good, but if you mingle with the bad, you'll destroy such soul as you had. Musonius Rufus, quoting Theognis of Megara, Lectures, 11.53.21-22. Jim Rohn's widely quoted line is, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." James Altucher advises young writers and entrepreneurs to find their scene, a group of peers who push them to be better. Your father might have given you a warning when he saw you spending time with some bad kids. Remember, you become like your friends. One of Goethe's maxims captures it better. Tell me with whom you consort, and I will tell you who you are. Consciously consider whom you allow into your life, not like some snobby elitist, but like someone who is trying to cultivate the best life possible. Ask yourself about the people you meet and spend time with. Are they making me better? Do they encourage me to push forward and hold me accountable? Or do they drag me down to their level? Now, with this in mind, ask the most important question. Should I spend more or less time with these folks? The second part of Goethe's quote tells us the stakes of this choice. "If I know how you spend your time," he said, "then I know what might become of you."
And that was the Daily Stoic. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
We do indeed have within Christianity a tradition of referring to Jesus as master or teacher, and to those of us who follow him as disciples or learners. And that's altogether right. But here's the problem. All sorts of other religious figures could be seen as a master who have disciples. Even someone like Socrates, the philosopher, could be seen as a teacher who has disciples or followers. Disciple from discere in Latin just means to learn. Nothing wrong with that when it comes to Christianity, but it doesn't go deep enough. Because in Christianity, we have not simply a relationship of student to teacher when it comes to Jesus. Rather, we participate organically in him. Let me say that again. He's not just our teacher, not just our moral exemplar, not someone we'd simply imitate from a historical distance. We live in him. We are rooted and grounded in him. That's the way a Christian relates to Jesus.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day.
What's wrong with loving your fellow man? Christ, every important moral leader in man's history, has taught us that we should love one another. Why, then, is this kind of love, in your mind, immoral?
It is immoral if it is a love placed above oneself. It is more than immoral, it's impossible. Because when you are asked to love everybody indiscriminately, that is, to love people without any standard, to love them regardless of whether they have any value or virtue, you are asked to love nobody.
And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the 33 strategies of war.
From the I Ching. At times, one has to deal with hidden enemies, intangible influences that slink into dark corners, and from this hiding affect people by suggestion. In instances like this, it is necessary to trace these things back to the most secret recesses in order to determine the nature of the influences to be dealt with. The very anonymity of such plotting requires an especially vigorous and indefatigable effort, but this is well worthwhile. For when such elusive influences are brought into the light and branded, they lose their power over people.
And that was the 33 Strategies of War. Back in a minute. Thank you. So you may as well, if you're a Democrat, you may as well consider at least voting Republican, because in the state of California, one of the big shots in the Democrat Party, Gloria Molina, just switched parties, went from Democrat to Republican. And what's remarkable about that in the state of California is that the Democrats own this state. They have majorities everywhere. And so for a Democrat, particularly Gloria Molina, who has been in California politics for quite a long time, to switch parties is saying something. So, and also Mr. Alan Dershowitz is leaving the Democrat Party. He announced that today, and he's not becoming a Republican. He's going to become an independent, but still, the Democrat Party is losing a lot of people. So you as a Democrat voter might want to consider voting Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we're going to have the second half of Chapter 7, A Great Awakening, 27 minutes long, from Bad News.
Instead of joining hands with their new partners on the right, instead of zeroing in on things like the intergenerational poverty of inner cities and mass incarceration, the national media started mainstreaming a re-racialized worldview committed to race as the defining characteristic of American life. The question is, why? Why did the news media of a nation finally overcoming the great scourge of its history suddenly become obsessed with that scourge and with obfuscating its erasure? How did an endless culture war develop over racism? What kind of white supremacy exists when the remaining few white supremacists are utterly marginalized? And more importantly, how did Americans become convinced that we live in a white supremacist country, even as our neighbors and family members abandon their racist views? It started in academia. While journalists were undergoing a status revolution from blue-collar workers to an elite caste, another revolution was happening of a more philosophical sort. American universities were undergoing a shift away from facts and grand narratives and toward relativism. In the 1960s and 70s, two related philosophical movements, postmodernism and critical theory, were taking over multiple academic disciplines, and they were laying the groundwork for the point of view that would come to dominate American journalism in the 21st century. It's a point of view that sees domination and oppression in every human interaction. Critical theory has its roots in the writings of German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. In his seminal philosophical treatise, The Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel wrote that self-consciousness itself is an evolutionary byproduct of dominating and of being dominated by another human. And it isn't just self-consciousness. Society, culture, and history are produced in the back and forth, or dialectic, between the powerful and the powerless. The master-slave dialectic, as Hegel's parent came to be known in subsequent iterations. It was this dynamic, one person with all the power oppressing another person with none, that Marx picked up in his analysis of class. In it, he argued that embedded within the contract between the capitalist and the proletariat, what today we call the employer and the employee, is the relationship between master and slave, and the only thing that exists between them is exploitation and oppression. This aspect of Marx's thought, seeing through the illusions of everyday life to the real exploitative nature of our society and institutions, was then picked up by the postmodernists, French philosophers like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault exposed what they viewed as the falsely universal claims of the historical and cultural narratives we rely upon. They sought to undermine these narratives by insisting there is a hidden power dynamic in them, in that they justify and benefit the powerful. For postmodernist thinkers, the narratives we accept as making up our history are not based on true events, but simply serve as justifications for power, the only truth the postmodernists recognized. Take the narrative of America's founding. For many of us, the Constitution is the document on which the United States was founded in the search for equality and freedom, which ended up failing to live up to its universal promise by depriving many people of the freedoms it offered the few. Not so for the postmodernists, who view the Constitution as a document justifying the power of the state over its citizens, justifying those deemed ineligible, and justifying the ownership of enslaved persons. Your symbol of freedom and equality is nothing more than a tool of repression, the postmodernists argue. The failures at its margins expose the hypocrisy of the whole and define the Constitution as a lie designed to perpetuate the rule of the powerful. This was the exact argument made by the New York Times Magazine's seminal Pulitzer Prize-winning 2019 work, The 1619 Project, commemorating the year that the first African slave was brought to American shores. The project is a collection of essays that has been turned into a curriculum for school children, arguing that while we all believe that 1776 is the year of our nation's founding, the country's true birth date, the moment that its defining contradictions first came into the world, was in late August of 1619, the year chattel slavery began, as editor-in-chief Jake Silverstein put it. This maximalist claim overlay and ended up overshadowing much of the serious work put into the collection. The project's impresario, Nicole Hannah-Jones, wrote movingly about her father's patriotism in the face of racism and about how Black Americans are equally this nation's founding fathers. Our founding ideals of liberty and equality were false when they were written, wrote Hannah-Jones. Black Americans have fought to make them true. But to this poignant point, others were added, including one that is factually incorrect. Conveniently left out of our founding mythology is the fact that one of the primary reasons the colonists decided to declare their independence from Britain was because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery. After an uproar from historians and some serious doubling down from the Times, the words "some of" were added to modify the colonists. It is significant that the Times put its imprimatur and then doubled down on a document with such a major error against the advice of a fact-checker, as we later learned. But perhaps more significant is how closely the project hewed to postmodernist ideology. It was a classic postmodernist reversal. The founding of this country, which you thought was a symbol of equality and liberty, a great human achievement, albeit a flawed and incomplete one, is in fact a symbol, the very apotheosis of its opposite: slavery, torture, theft, and oppression. Certainly there's some truth in the claim. The Constitution was composed while some of its authors owned slaves. Its guarantees only extended to men and reduced enslaved persons to 3/5 of a human. It did not live up to the ideal it had set forth for itself. But it also provided a foundational, incontrovertible document for the civil rights movement to reference successfully in making the case that these freedoms should be extended to all people. In other words, it was a flawed achievement, but a big one nonetheless. One of the reasons that life for minorities is inarguably so much better today than it was half a century ago. This progress is something postmodernists can never recognize. It's not just that they don't acknowledge that something can be good but flawed. It's that they don't believe in equality at all. Like Marx and Hegel before them, postmodernists believe that history itself is just a revolving door of masters and slaves, oppressors and oppressed, even abandoning their predecessors' belief in an ultimate utopian endgame. And in the 1970s, a new group of American scholars applied this same model to thinking about race. You may not have heard of critical race theory, but you've probably heard of its most famous purveyors, Ibram X. Kendi, author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, and Robin DiAngelo, author of White Fragility. These books have topped the New York Times bestseller list for months at a time, and their ideas are being implemented across corporate America in anti-racist training sessions. Both authors articulate a view in which racism is defined not as the belief that one race is superior to another or that races should be treated differently before the law, but as a failure to support and promote an adequately racialized approach to policy, what Kendi calls being anti-racist. The language of colorblindness, like the language of not racist, is a mask to hide racism, he writes. Is itself racism? White identity is inherently racist, DiAngelo writes, and white progressives, people who believe they are not racist, are the most problematic of all. Hiding behind the well wishes of white Americans anxious to address racial inequities and in the tears white people shed when accused of being racist, DiAngelo sees a deeper racism that presents the real threat. I believe that white progressives cause the most daily damage to people of color, she writes. To drive home the point, DiAngelo's second book is called Nice Racism: How Progressive White People Perpetuate Racial Harm. The idea that white identity is inherently racist has made Robin DiAngelo a very wealthy woman. White Fragility has sold almost 800,000 copies since its publication in 2018. She's not the only one. Twitter founder Jack Dorsey gave Kendi $10 million to start an anti-racist foundation. In a post-George Floyd America, these ideas have moved solidly into the mainstream of American life. Anti-bias trainings created under their influence are now a staple of corporate America, ubiquitous in schools across America, and even mandatory for students' parents in some places. What they are mainstreaming is critical race theory, or what today we call wokeness. And like the postmodernists, critical race theorists do not believe in equality. Unlike traditional civil rights discourse, which stresses incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law, according to Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanik in Critical Race Theory and Introduction. The critical race theorists coalesced in the 1970s after the major gains of the civil rights movement and questioned the lasting progress that had been made. Like Foucault, they went beyond basic questions of racism, about subjects like lower courts cutting into the civil rights gains and white people not letting their child swim in a pool with a black child, and instead began to discuss structural racism, a view that casts white people, whether or not they are aware of it, as perpetuators of white supremacy by simply existing in a system that privileges them. If racism is systemic, then no white member of society seems quite so innocent, write Delgado and Stefanik. Whiteness is guilt, is oppression for critical race theorists. Rich whites benefit materially from their whiteness, while poor whites benefit in psychic ways, they write. Critical race theory has yet to develop a comprehensive theory of class, and encourages minorities to see themselves in solidarity with minorities in other countries, rather than with the white working class and the poor in America. Like Foucault, proponents of critical race theory, which in the post-George Floyd world include much of corporate America and much of the liberal news media, cannot acknowledge change because they don't accept the existence or even the possibility of equality. There are only power and oppression between people and groups. The thing is, it's not the oppressed minorities who have bought into this paradigm. It's those cast as the oppressors. It's white liberals. In the past few years, multiple pollsters, scholars, and sociologists have documented a surprising shift in liberal white public opinion. It's gotten woke. In fact, liberal whites have gotten more woke than blacks and Latinos. The political science PhD student Zach Goldberg found that white liberals are significantly more likely than blacks and Hispanics to say that racial diversity makes America a better place to live. 87% of white liberals have this opinion, compared to just over half of black Americans and just 45% of Hispanics. Meanwhile, both black and Hispanic Americans are significantly more likely than white liberals to think that diversity actually makes America a worse place to live. White liberals also perceive significantly greater voter suppression than black and Hispanic Americans do, and were 10 percentage points more likely to believe blacks shouldn't be expected to overcome prejudice and work their way up in society on their own without special favors. When it comes to discrimination, the numbers are even starker. According to Pew's survey data collected in 2017, almost 80% of white liberals believed that racial discrimination is the main reason why many black people can't get ahead these days. Just over 18% of them agreed that blacks who can't get ahead in this country are mostly responsible for their own condition. Among blacks, however, the numbers are quite different. Just 60% identified discrimination as the main impediment to African American economic mobility, while 32% said blacks are responsible for their condition. Most amazing is a CNN poll conducted in 2006 and again in 2015. The poll found that in the intervening 9 years, the number of white Democrats who answered yes when asked if they knew anyone they would consider racist rose by 19% from 45% in 2006 to 64% in 2015. Meanwhile, the number of non-white Democrats who said they knew someone they would consider racist dropped from 50% to 42%. So while non-whites are seeing fewer and fewer racists, liberal whites are seeing more and more of them. Where did this great awakening come from? Did the left wing shift on questions of identity create a market that the New York Times and other liberal media outlets took advantage of? Or did the national media effectuate this shift? For Goldberg, the jury is in. The media, with a steady drumbeat of reporting and editorializing, convinced white liberals that ever more things were deserving of the label racist. It's the mission creep that critical race theory birthed. As actual racism waned, the liberal news media at the highest levels broadened the category of what counts as racist. As Goldberg writes, editorial decisions made over the past decade at some of the most powerful media outlets in the world about what kind of language to use and what kind of stories merited coverage when it came to race, whatever the intention and level of forethought behind such decisions, has stoked a revival of racial consciousness among their readers, intentionally or not, by introducing and then constantly repeating a set of keywords and concepts. Publications like the New York Times have helped normalize among their readership the belief that color is the defining attribute of other human beings. When you define racism as an omnipresent white supremacist framework baked into the heart of our nation that can never be solved or extracted, you give people a culture where they can hammer away at forever, a perpetual cudgel against those who disagree with them, even if those who disagree with them are less affluent and less fortunate, the losers of the economic and culture war. Couple that with Twitter, an environment rich with the pheromones and ideology of youth, where young journalists, dazzled by the potential to be famous and anxious to be the good guys in a drama starring themselves, discovered they could push the ideology they'd picked up at their Ivy League universities and peddle it to the acclaim of Twitter activists with millions of followers. And rather than pushing back, the business model of 21st century journalism rewarded this obsession with race. By defining racism as both the worst character trait a person can have and a central defining part of the DNA of America, omnipresent in every institution and every situation, the national news media was given a story that was both shocking and available in every nook and cranny in which the reporters should care to look. They simply could not have found a better way to drive traffic. All roads led to a culture war around race. as the class of journalists became more and more highly educated and major news corporations began to hire from an ever more exclusive set of Ivy League universities and the local newspaper industry collapsed, a younger generation of journalists brought the ideas they'd learned at their exclusive universities with them to the newsroom, including, most consequentially, critical race theory. And as major publications began to focus more and more of their energy on their digital products, great liberal bastions of civil debate and discourse like the New Republic became indistinguishable from Vox. Everyone was now using the tricks of digital media to court the same young woke readership who had gone to the same schools and were thus versed in the same tenets of postmodernism and woke ideology. In other words, for all the talk about fighting for racial equality, the re-racialization of American life through a woke culture war was simply the next phase in the status revolution of journalists and who they viewed as their readers. You can see this in the case of the Times, where the Great Awakening has specifically taken place in the context of luxury marketing. Take the style section, which used to run only on Sundays and now runs on Thursdays too, a decision made because of how much money the section brings in from luxury brands. The print section is even produced on higher quality paper than the rest of the Times. No need to skimp on paper when you're running Armani and Rolex ads. What's astonishing is that the cover of the style section is one of the most woke spaces in the entire Times. Above the Armani ads are articles like, "Despite everything, people still have weddings at plantation sites. The incredible whiteness of the museum fashion collection. It's time to end racism in the fashion industry, but how? And when will a reckoning on racism catch up with reality TV?" These headlines don't exist in tension with the Armani ads they appear on top of. They are the content Armani has paid tens of thousands of dollars to embed beneath. The October 2020 edition of the Times' luxury magazine, T, had a picture of activist Angela Davis on the front cover and an ad for Cartier on the back cover, because they are two sides of the same coin. How can this be? Where did this market come from? Why did white liberals, in particular the kind of affluent white liberals courted by media outlets like the New York Times, buy into an academic framework that pushes a narrative that intentionally belies what they are seeing with their own eyes, that cast them and their children as white supremacists? And how did they buy into it so deeply that all the publications that cater to them followed suit in exactly the same way? No doubt, many of the people currently caught up in what has become a moral panic around race are truly horrified by racial inequity and truly believe they want to live in a more equitable society. But there's also a way in which wokeness doesn't actually ask that much of them beyond guilty feelings. For all the talk of systemic change, the obsession with race elegantly papers over a truer chasm in American life, economic inequality, that would demand much more from the affluent should they ever care to address it. And there's little evidence that liberals, for all their pieties, truly wish to address income inequality. For 30 years now, American liberals have become ever more highly educated and increasingly attached to the meritocracy that so richly rewarded them. Though they struggle to see it, this meritocratic view that American liberals subscribe to is based on the inherently unequal belief that not only wealth and privilege, but political power itself should be the special province of the smart and talented. And as people like Christopher Lasch and Michael Lind have pointed out, an obsession with racial parity at the tippy top of the economic ladder is crucial to sustaining the fiction that the reigning elites earned their right to their success, power, and wealth due to their own talent. After all, if there are only white people at the top, it's clearly not merit alone that got you there. Focusing exclusively on race is a great way to do nothing at all to disturb the unequal social structures that have allowed the elites of both political persuasions to rise so very far above everyone else. And while there absolutely should be more people of color represented among the elites, this question is one that largely obscures another urgent and important one. What happens to everyone else? No one can claim ignorance of the rampant inequality ravaging America today, but what the mainstreaming of the anti-racist ideology has done is to relieve liberals of the burden of actually doing anything about it. After all, if the root of inequality lies in something as immutable as your whiteness, rather than any economic or political decision you have control over, you can't do anything about it but feel guilty. Imagine the relief of affluent liberals in finding out that there's literally nothing they can do to alleviate the awful disparity between what they earn for typing on their computers all day and what they pay their nannies to take care of their children. And you'll start to understand the hugely successful mainstreaming of a culture war around race. Drunk on the meritocratic fiction that their success is the result of their own intelligence and talent, yet desperate to see themselves as compassionate, and in many cases truly bothered by inequality, race provided the perfect alibi. Though many well-meaning liberals don't realize it, the re-racialization of American life further entrenches a deeply unequal status quo, and there is a paternalism at work that is embarrassing and dehumanizing. Under the guise of doing the work of anti-racism, white liberals have taught themselves to center people of color and to silence their own views. This isn't empowering, it's insulting to people from minority communities in the same way that critical race theory insults them, by labeling them as passive objects subjected to the whims and whimsies of whites with no agency of their own. These stereotypes are the bread and butter of wokeness, but their real-world impact is awful. After all, it is only white liberals who a Yale study found dumb down their speech when talking to people of color. Most whites, particularly socio-political liberals, now endorse racial equality. Archival and experimental research reveals a subtle but reliable ironic consequence. White liberals self-present less competence to minorities than to other whites. That is, they patronize minorities stereotyped as lower status and less competent, found the study, conducted by Yale professor Sidney Dupre and Princeton professor Susan Fisk. What kind of worldview makes liberals dumb down their speech when talking to people of color? The one that comes from the world that anti-racism created. We have seen throughout this book that the news media catering to elites is not new. The New York Times has, since its inception, set a premium on excluding from its readership the have-nots, the unwashed masses who can't afford to even dream about a Cartier watch or a Ralph Lauren suit. But it didn't used to cast this exclusive elitism as a crusade on behalf of the disenfranchised. Woke media has allowed a powerful liberal elite to do just this, to portray its own economic interests as speaking truth to power, all the while consolidating huge amounts of power in a small, highly educated caste. Anti-racism is a great displacement exercise, a magic trick that transforms economic guilt into racial guilt, absolving the rich of any role in solving inequality because it's rooted in the one thing they have no control over, their race. It was the perfect worldview for white liberals, increasingly college-educated and affluent, a diffuse intelligentsia employed in creative, knowledge-based, and managerial jobs, convinced of their own superior virtue and desperate to telegraph it. America's news media stepped in to show them how to keep their rarefied status while also feeling like heroes. All it would cost would be a yearly subscription.
And that was the end of Chapter 7, A Great Awakening. So far, she's kind of missing the point, the post-Marxist point on all of this, but we still got a ways to go, another 2.5 hours worth of this book, and we'll see if maybe later on in the book, maybe if there's a conclusion or something, that she goes ahead and makes this discovery. So that, again, was Chapter 7, A Great Awakening from Bad News, How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy by Batya Unger Sargon. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.